Spaceship has landed. True logic. Okay, for those of you that are wondering what inspires me to do some of these videos, I do have a bachelor's degree in politics from Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. Definitely had a long interest in the political sphere, in international relations, and a lot of other similar things. So it's dope for me to talk about it. I love doing research and learning about it and how it affects my current everyday life. You know, if there's one thing that the global economy shows us, it's that all governments and countries around the world are to some capacity interdependent and interconnected. That being said, today I am speaking about the current Sudan crisis in northern Africa in the state of Sudan, right? Now, a few things. According to Foreign Policy magazine, the current ruler of Sudan is now Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hameti. The previous 30-year-long ruler stepped down and the military subsequently took over, though Foreign Policy magazine has described it essentially as a coup, right? According to BBC, Omar al-Bashir was the ruler of Sudan for 30 years and was known to be quite the brutal dictator. He was overthrown by massive, peaceful, youth-led protests in the capital of Khartoum. Furthermore, according to the BBC, in response to these pro-civilian governmental protests, the Military Council of Sudan decided to violently crack down on its people, but it also shut off the internet service to the entire country. And as far as I know at this current moment, that service is yet to be restored, but as I said, I'm not entirely sure. Okay. There was a violent crackdown on pro-democracy protesters, as I said. This happened in June, and it led to the deaths of over 100 people, and hundreds of others were severely injured in this governmental attack. And as far as all public knowledge and understanding goes, these were peaceful protesters, unarmed protesters, who were, well, viciously gunned down by the military council, right? Just had to decline a call. Word, okay. But, however, the military council's perspective refers to the group of people protesters that they attacked as the Colombia, saying that they are somehow Colombian immigrants who are seeking to immigrate themselves into Sudanese society or something like that. Not quite sure there. According to Foreign Policy magazine, though, Dagalo recently hired a multi-million-dollar lobbying firm to increase his legitimacy in the U.S., Russia, and Saudi Arabia, and in the eyes of many multilateral institutions. The lobbying firm that he hired to do this is a Canadian firm known as Dickens and Madsen. I've never heard of them, but really the type of firm that would represent dictators or military coup leaders or the type of people I don't want to know too much about, so fuck them, right? He also invited a former U.S. senator for discussions, though it did not list who this senator was. But again, these are just attempts to establish legitimacy for the military council's current rule, right? According to Foreign Policy, here are a few of the things that Dagalo is requesting that this Canadian firm lobby for on his behalf. They are seeking military training and support, infrastructure development assistance, and food security support from Russia. Right. Additionally, they are seeking to obtain funds from a Libyan general who's currently vying for power. The article in Foreign Policy didn't specify whether or not this Libyan general was Khalifa Haftar, former general of Muammar Gaddafi, who is currently fighting in Libya for control of the country against a UN-backed governmental leader. Alright, getting into my opinion on this subject matter after the brief detailed discussion of the facts at hand, this is definitely a strong humanitarian crisis that is not receiving widespread media coverage in the U.S. The lack of widespread media coverage and acknowledgement of this crisis in the U.S. is typical of attitudes permeating through U.S. society which devalue black lives, especially when it comes to atrocities committed by individuals overseas against black people, right? And what do I mean by this? Well, consider, for example, the fact that the 2015 Paris terrorist attacks resulted in the deaths of 130 people, according to CNN.com. And this received massive international calls for prayer and support. And beyond, it was widely talked about on the media and television shows, news shows, written media, newspaper publishings, and so forth, right? It received a lot of acknowledgement, a lot of support, a lot of attention, Twitter hashtags, pray for Paris, and so forth, right? Yet, in U.S. society at least, this same amount of support has not at all been shown for the Sudanese people, despite the fact that they are citizens fighting for the same types of rights that are enjoyed by the citizens of the United States, France, Britain, and many of these other countries who have always supposedly claimed solidarity, right? So I'm a little skeptical of this. I mean, another thing that this highlights to me is how, there was widespread media coverage in the U.S. society about ISIS, yet the fact that Boko Haram was carrying out many terrorist attacks in the name of ISIS in order to pledge their support to ISIS, including at least one instance in which they strapped suicide bombs to two unwilling young girls, the oldest of which was only 10 years old, and forced them to blow themselves up in a market full of people. Yet that received very little acknowledgement and coverage in the United States media, especially when it comes to televised media, right? But furthermore, this Sudan issue currently highlights a discussion that I had on my Periscope. For those of you that don't know, Devon Jupiter is my Periscope name. You can follow me on there. But on my Periscope, I talked about the flaws in removing a dictator from power. Particularly, I talked about how deposing a dictator is not necessarily always the most effective solution if there has been no pre-established means of successfully transitioning into a new governmental system, right? And here's why. Okay, socioeconomic conditions will change along with massive governmental change, right? Governments shape economies and vice versa. Thus, the flow of goods, services, and resources is affected by the removal of a dictator, either due to the infrastructure damage that is caused by military conflict and infighting between, rebel forces and whoever the dictator is at hand, which is the case that we saw in Yemen, right? For those of you that are aware of the current ongoing conflict in Yemen, which Saudi Arabia definitely plays a role in, between the Houthis, Saudis, and other people vying for power and control in Yemen, right? Fighting and chaos and bombings and so forth led to massive infrastructure damage, which subsequently led to shortages in clean water, which subsequently led to a cholera outbreak that was responsible for the deaths of over 1 million children in Yemen, right? And that's the way infighting destroyed infrastructure, leading to more chaos and disease because of the necessary infighting to fill the power vacuum of the state. Hence why perhaps removing a dictator without a pre-established means of peacefully transitioning into a new governmental system may create similar power vacuums, which has similar effects on those citizens, right? Also, removing a dictator may mean the bureaucratic collapse of the institutions which provided the resources to the citizens, right? Say what you want about dictators. Certainly I am pro-democracy for all intents and purposes. I do not support dictators. However, I do understand that stability can be provided in many forms of governmental systems, including a dictatorship. And in certain instances, the stability provided by a dictatorship at least allows for a state to have functioning bureaucracies which can address the needs of its people, right? Now, the latter issue has certainly been the case for Sudan, right? Which is why the Canadian firm lobbying for Dagalo in the military's behalf are seeking food security from Russia, right? Because as chaos happens and governments begin to collapse, again, those institutions that were controlled, monitored, operated, etc. by the government are no longer functioning properly and subsequently able to provide the necessary services and resources to its people, right? The dictator falls, the people suffer, right? You might say they were suffering under the dictator, sure, but again, my point here is perhaps removing the dictator or deposing him immediately is not always, in every instance of every state, the most effective solution. Alright, now, given that 100 people were killed and hundreds of others injured in a vicious crackdown on peaceful pro-democracy protests, it does not appear that the people of Sudan are necessarily in a better position now than with al-Bashir in power. Besides, Dagalo's decision to use a lobbying firm as opposed to listening and responding to the cries of the protesters indicates that he's clearly more into appearances than substantive change. This is an early sign of negative intent, and he is clearly attempting to wipe his image clean of the military coup stain. Right? Furthermore, the decision by the military council to turn off the internet is another indicator that controlling entity in maintaining in power is more important to these people than legitimate governing of the Sudanese people, right? According to Democracy Now!, the military council also closed the Al Jazeera branch of Khartoum, the capital, and banned its reporters, right? Additionally, one raid on protesters in a sit-in that was in front of the defense ministry saw the military use tear gas, sound grenades, and then subsequently live ammunition, which resulted in the deaths of at least 9 of those individuals present. The attempted total media shutout worries that there may be other and far worse human rights violations that are yet publicly known, right? Again, when you're looking at it from the outside, looking in, it doesn't appear that Dagalo or the military council has any true interest at all, as of yet, in establishing a civilian-led government. There have been no elections set up or anything like that, no suggestion of any type of representational governmental system or Congress or anything or any equivalent of that accord. They've simply cracked down on peaceful protesters, shut off the internet, banned journalists, and then hired a lobbying firm to make their image look better in the eyes of other countries, right? This is propaganda for dictatorial rule like number 1, right? I mean, Kim Jong-un has used many of these same tactics, cutting off the internet and controlling the flow of information between his citizens and people in the outside world, right? Using the military to control people, right? Controlling the media sources, banning reporters, and controlling what they say, don't say, and what people can see, right? These are typically signs of individuals who are interested in maintaining power and control more so than they are in providing the necessary services to its citizens and or allowing its citizens the right to vote and have a say in a government of their choosing and so forth, right? So it often seems to be the case in many countries in many instances, right? One dictator is replaced with another, right? So after so many years or so of rule, the people have finally had it up with whoever the current ruler or dictator is. He or she, typically, historically speaking, it's a he, obviously, is overthrown, killed, deposed, flees the country, or whatever, and then subsequently, that power vacuum is filled by the military, as was the case in Egypt as well, when Morsi was removed from power, and the military filled that gap, right? However, in certain instances, it could also lead, like in the case of Yemen, to a failed state, right? Where the lack of any sufficient strong military control over the entire country or any strong central governmental authority leads to constant infighting for power that only destroys the country and prevents the citizens from being able to live normal, free lives, right? And again, this is the power vacuum created by the instability of removing a dictator. And I think the Sudanese example is a good example of that. Another example that I once spoke about was Libya, right? Though the Libyan crisis is arguably in some ways not necessarily as bad as the Yemeni crisis, it's still a crisis nonetheless. Similar thing, the removal of a dictator, in Libya's case, Muammar Gaddafi, and then subsequently infighting in chaos in order to replace that dictator's power vacuum, or fill that dictator's power vacuum, rather. Alright? Word. So, I am definitely sending out well wishes to the people of Sudan. Hopefully, sometime soon, though, again, probabilistically speaking, realistically speaking, it doesn't seem likely, but hopefully one day soon, and by soon I mean within the next year, 2 years of processes and bureaucracy and logistics and negotiations and so forth and whatever needs to be done, hopefully within that time span, they can achieve their dream of a civilian-led democratic government. But at the current moment, it appears to be, just as I said, the removal of a dictator, replacing one form of dictatorial rule with another. Send me comments and let me know what you think. What do you think the probability of Sudan ever being able to successfully transition into a democratic government is? Spaceship blasting off. And that is true logic. Boom.